The Casey Anthony story was a spectacle that captivated the world over, and it was a case that would leave onlookers completely stunned.
Verdict as to count 1. We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty.
But what really happened? How did a case that appeared to have all of the tenets of guilt and culpability result in such a confounding verdict? While blame and speculation has run rampant throughout the entirety of the news media, the internet, and the world at large, one thing seemed evident to me. There had to be more to this story, and I was determined to find answers. In my research, I remembered a case that I had worked on while employed at a law firm in their litigation department. That day, I was deep in my preparation for an upcoming trial and received a call from the expert that we had employed during the discovery phase. He offered to meet me in my office to discuss his upcoming testimony and to go over important details. Now, the expert was a retired former prosecutor who had a wealth of knowledge covering criminal litigation, and I was eager to glean any important details that he could offer to help bolster our case. During our discussion, he began to explain the potential pitfalls we would face, and then shed light on a fairly recent development within the modern criminal justice system, a phenomenon known as the CSI Effect. Now, the CSI Effect has been described as the influence of crime-related media and the impact that it has on jurors' expectations throughout the prosecution of a defendant in a jury trial. The expert would explain that television-educated jurors had already begun to have a deleterious impact on the outcome of cases that prosecutors had previously won. And in recent years, studies have suggested that this bias resulted in an increased burden of proof laid upon the prosecution from beyond a reasonable doubt to beyond any doubt whatsoever. A recent survey comprised of a panel of former jurors seemed to support this claim. In the survey, they found that 22% of jurors expected to see DNA evidence presented at trial. 36% expected to see fingerprint evidence, and 46% of jurors expected to see some form of scientific evidence presented during the trial. And these expectations seem to exist even when the evidence did not exist, or when it was intentionally destroyed by the defendant. Additionally, the data has shown the steady increase of exonerations in criminal trials continuously rising from the 1990s on through the present. And before he left that day, he would again restate his belief that jurors would continue to expect indisputable scientific evidence in order to find a defendant guilty. Returning to my office that evening, I remember being baffled by my discussion with this expert, and at the time, I dismissed his story as the overly analytical musings of a passionate former prosecutor. I stored his formal opinion away and didn't think about it again, until the Casey Anthony verdict. Today, we will begin the turbulent journey of revisiting a case that impacted the world over. And throughout this series, I would like to present my case for what I believe are the influences and reasons why the jury ultimately failed to convict Casey Anthony, and tell the excruciating story of a woman who rejected the intrinsic responsibilities of a mother who cared only for herself, proudly proclaiming that she had no regrets. A woman who carefully crafted an ornate ruse to delay the recovery of the only evidence that could keep her from what she wanted most. A life free of maternal responsibility. A life without her daughter, Casey Anthony. This is the tragic tale of a filicidal sociopath, the Casey Anthony story, Episode 1. In the years since the Casey Anthony trial, many have analyzed the case and its defendant, including speculating to the possible underlying mental health issues that may have contributed to her manipulative and shocking behavior. And while we cannot know her state of mind or state any definitive diagnosis, it is my opinion that compelling evidence does exist to support claims of sociopathy. Now, when we refer to someone as a sociopath, the underlying psychological condition for sociopathy is described as antisocial personality disorder, or ASPD, a disorder described by the DSM-5 as a consistent disregard for rules, social norms, and repeated violations of people's rights with little to no remorse. But let's dig a little deeper. Further analysis reveals these additional signs and symptoms of ASPD. Symptoms may include dishonesty and deceit, including manipulating others for personal gain, difficulty controlling impulses, leading to criminal behavior or acting without consideration for the consequences. Additional signs include a disregard for the safety of themselves and others, as well as aggravated or aggressive behavior and difficulty managing personal responsibilities. Those with ASPD can also come across as arrogant or superior while using humor, charm, and charisma to manipulate others. And in all of this behavior, one of the most common hallmarks is the pervasive lack of remorse. Those with ASPD often find it difficult to maintain relationships due to their condition. They often have difficulty learning from personal mistakes, and one that you'll want to remember, they frequently demonstrate their lack of concern for others. Now, even if this diagnosis had been brought forward by the prosecution at trial, it would not exculpate Casey Anthony from her personal, legal, and societal responsibilities, let alone the ethical and moral responsibilities of a mother to her child. Mental health disorders help us to understand the offender with deeper clarity, but they are not excuses for their behavior. And when we compare and contrast what we now know, this information helps provide a focused perspective on the personality and motivations of a woman still attempting to convince the world of her innocence. And in a recent interview, she did exactly that. 9 years after her trial, Casey Anthony would speak with the Associated Press in March of 2017. It would be her first and only public interview after the trial. And in this interview, she would give her version of events concerning the death of Caylee Anthony.
But you were also convicted of one thing.
Lying to the cops.
Right.
People lie to the cops every day. Cops lie to people every day. I'm just one of the unfortunate idiots who admitted that they lied.
While I agree that people lie to the police every day, the fact that she would even attempt to characterize what she did during that time as normal everyday behavior says a lot about her personal growth since the trial. Nothing about her actions or behavior were normal, and she personally never admitted that she lied. Her attorney changed her story during the trial to an entirely new fantastical tale in order to save her from death row.
I see why I was treated the way that I was, even had I been completely truthful with those officers.
What weren't you truthful about? And I understand it might have been out of panic.
It was things that I didn't know at the time.
That pause after his question was almost 5 seconds long, followed by an answer that, even if you didn't know anything about this case, sounds completely untruthful. Not to mention her implication that she was somehow treated poorly by law enforcement, which has to be one of the most idiotic statements I've heard come from her mouth. She wasted countless resources from law enforcement, the community, and innumerable volunteers who tirelessly searched for her daughter, despite likely knowing where Caylee was the entire time. She fabricated elaborate narratives, intentionally misled law enforcement, offered up fake names, addresses, and places of employment, and she has the gall to imply that she was somehow wronged? Caylee Anthony was wronged and mistreated. Casey was simply held accountable.
I'm still not even certain as I stand here today about what happened.
I don't know. To your understanding, how did she die?
I don't know.
You don't know? Something about drowning, possibly.
Everyone else has their theories. I don't know.
Uh-huh. So your parents had her?
My dad did.
And next thing you know, she's missing, and right? How did it play?
I did what I was told. I don't remember too much of what happened.
There's almost too much to pick apart here, but did you notice how none of what she just said sounds authentic, truthful, or even remotely genuine? And to those who might not be aware, Casey has indicated that she is participating in a documentary about her case where she claims that she will be providing proof of her innocence. But if this interview is any indicator of what she intends to say, she will only fall deeper into the hole she's been digging since the trial.
Give me the situation when things went wrong. When did things go wrong? All of a sudden, it's like, where's Kaylee? Like, is that how it went?
No, what I remember is being in bed, my mom coming in before she left for work and saying goodbye to us. And then waking up several hours later. And
later in the morning.
Hour, 2 hours later, and not knowing where she was.
Don't you wish you know what happened?
Absolutely.
And still, after all this time, she sticks to the narrative that defense attorney Baez peddled for her during the trial. You know, the one where her own father was responsible for Kaylee's death? But it certainly helps shed light on why her own parents still want nothing to do with her.
I don't give a shit about what anybody thinks about me. I don't care about that.
Yeah.
I never will. I'm okay with myself. I sleep pretty good at night.
This is a fantastic demonstration in how to conduct your life without class, empathy, or the mere semblance of human decency. But this interview helps to lend credence to the prior assertion of sociopathy. The truth of the matter is, Casey could tell the complete and unfiltered truth about the death of Kaylee, and it wouldn't matter because of double jeopardy. Instead, she would rather eviscerate her parents and the memory of Kaylee, all while refusing to show even a modicum of class along the way. An important thing to note about the interview with the AP is that 7 months after it, Casey's parents would conduct their own interview with True Crime Daily. And in that interview, her mother would state that she believed that Casey did in fact have a mental health disorder. Additionally, George Anthony would discuss the day he met with attorney Baez and was told about Casey's defense strategy. Attorney Baez told him that he would need to take the fall for Casey. He didn't ask George if he was involved in the death of Kaylee. He told him he was. And in that same interview, Casey's father stated publicly that he would sue Casey if she ever tried to sell her story. While creating this video, news just broke that the new documentary called Casey Anthony, Where the Truth Lies will premiere on Peacock later this month on November 29th. Now more than ever, we need to go back to the beginning and revisit where this travesty of justice began so that we can remind the world why the truth still matters, because of a little girl named Kaylee Marie Anthony, who would have turned 17 years old this year. Let's begin. Kaylee Marie Anthony was last seen at the home of George and Cindy Anthony on June 16, 2008. A full month later, after an explosive confrontation, Cindy Anthony would call 911, officially informing law enforcement of the missing child for the first time. From the onset, Casey Anthony's demeanor would quickly raise questions about the validity of her statements to the responding officers and later to the detectives assigned to the case. An immediate effort to find Kaylee began as law enforcement converged in an effort to locate the nanny that Casey claimed had kidnapped her 2-year-old daughter. In today's video, we will review the initial conversations that Casey had with law enforcement during the initial efforts to help locate Kaylee. And in this analysis, I will also evaluate Casey's most recent claims that law enforcement unfairly maligned and mistreated her.
And you're saying that everything contained in these statements are true and accurate?
Yes.
Also, before I turned on the recorder, I gave you a chance because I wanted to explain what happens if...
Detective Yuri Melik was about to go right into confronting Casey, but catches himself when he realizes that he has a few legal steps he needs to take first. He knows something is very off with this case and already has information that suggests Casey's sworn statement is full of holes. But in this moment, he's likely still hopeful that the enormity of the situation will scare Casey into doing the right thing and ultimately telling the truth. But he couldn't have known just how far down this rabbit hole was about to go.
Day right now is July 16, 2008. The time right now is 04:11 hours. I'm Detective Mellish with the Orange County Sheriff's Office. I'm present here at 4937 Hope Spring Drive. I reference Orange County case number 08-069208. I am with Casey Anthony, is that correct?
Yes.
And Casey, would you please state your birthday for me?
03/19/1986.
Okay. Casey, you understand this is being recorded?
Yes.
You have any objection to that?
No.
All right. Casey, I got called here by Sergeant Reggie Hosey with the Orange County Sheriff's Office in reference to a missing child. We sat here and talked for a short moment before we went on tape because I wanted to make sure that your sworn statement, which I'm looking at, was accurate. I'm looking at 4 pages of a sworn statement. On the bottom appears to be your signature. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you're saying that everything contained in these statements are true and accurate?
Yes.
Also, before I turned on the recorder, I gave you a chance because I wanted to explain what happens if you make a false report or if there's something about this incident that you're not telling us the truth of.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to make sure I made it perfectly clear that, you know, if you want to go ahead and rescind this statement, and if you want to tell me a different story about what happened,
Mm-hmm.
if you're trying to fabricate a story to kind of make something look a little bit better,
Mm-hmm.
now's your time to tell me. Are you telling me that this is the story you want to stick with?
That's the truth. It's the story I'm going to stick with. Yes.
Okay.
Within just a few weeks of this conversation, Casey Anthony would be placed under arrest on charges of forging 4 checks worth $650 from an account that she did not own and she did not have permission to use. During this time, she was also accused of stealing tens of thousands of dollars from her grandparents, her friends, and other family members. Despite Detective Mellich's warning, Casey believes in her ability to lie and manipulate, and his warnings mean less than nothing to someone who is willing to do that kind of harm to people that close to her.
In your own words, let's go back. Your daughter's name is Kaylee, Caylee.
Yes.
Marie Anthony. She was born August 9th.
2005.
Okay. And according to your statement back on August 9th, back on June 9th, 2008, you took Casey to a babysitter's house.
Yes.
And who was this babysitter?
Her name is Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez.
Do you know how to spell the first name?
Zenaida.
And where was Zenaida's? Where did you drop your child off?
The Sawgrass Apartments on Conway in Michigan.
Do you remember the address?
I don't remember the address.
Do you remember an apartment number?
210.
Okay.
It's on the 2nd floor.
One of the great tragedies of this case was hearing the jurors discuss their feelings of what they believe went wrong during the trial. Many of the jurors believed that the lead prosecutor was cold and arrogant. Now, having worked for brilliant attorneys for most of my life, I can attest to the fact that many times exceptional attorneys become so efficient at their jobs that they forget the importance of communicating to a layperson like a layperson. But the most shocking discovery for me was learning that the jurors believed that defense attorney Baez was truly caring and sincere. And all of that to say that even though we know Casey is in the middle of spewing demonstrable lies, she's only doing it because to this point of her life, it's worked.
If you were to pull into the Sawgrass Apartments, would the building be the one closest to the road, furthest back, halfway?
As soon as you go straight, you go over one speed bump, and it's the first one on the right-hand side.
Okay, is there a pool next to it, or is there anything about the apartment that stands out?
There's a welcome sign. It's, I guess there's a little shed close to the building, maybe about 10 yards away.
Okay. How long had you known Zenaida?
Almost 4 years. It'll be 4 years Christmas this year.
And where did you meet her? Who did you meet her through?
A mutual friend. His name is Jeffrey Michael Hopkins.
Jeffrey Hopkins would testify during the trial of Casey Anthony, and during his testimony, they would replay this segment of Casey's recorded statement. He would go on to explain that virtually every aspect of her statement to police was entirely made up and untrue. To onlookers watching the trial, it clearly demonstrated Casey's intentional efforts to mislead and misdirect law enforcement, which was one of the many indicators of her guilt. But later on, it was revealed that the prosecution's efforts to repeatedly impeach Casey's credibility had an entirely unexpected effect. While it would be an overstatement to say that the jurors felt a sense of sympathy for Casey, they sadly did not weigh her constant attempts to lie as a clear sign of her guilt and culpability, which even now, all these years later, still seems completely baffling.
I met him at Nickelodeon at Universal, and I met her through him. She was his son's nanny at the time.
Does Jeffrey still work at Universal?
No, he does not.
How long has it been since he left?
About 9-10 months, give or take.
He moved back to Jacksonville?
He moved up to North Carolina for a short time and moved down to Jacksonville within the last 3 months.
When was the last time you spoke with him?
About a week and a half ago.
Okay. Do you know a telephone number for him?
I can find a number for him. I don't know a number offhand. No, I do not.
You mentioned something before we went on tape about your cell phones.
Yes. I have 2 phones. I just received a new phone through work, through Universal. The phone won't keep charged, so I use my old phone that I actually had gotten, again, through Universal for work.
Okay.
Casey has only been speaking for a few minutes, and already most of what she said are verifiable lies. With even a cursory understanding of this case, by now most people know that Casey had a long, documented history of pathological lying. But allow me a brief foray into her past for those unfamiliar with that history. One of the most infamous stories occurred while Casey was still in high school. She had begun to miss very important classes that eventually put her ability to graduate completely out of reach. It wasn't until her parents were notified of her truancy and her inability to graduate that the truth forced its way out. But even then, she continued to double and triple down on the lie and continued to reject any notion of her responsibility or personal failure. And how did her parents respond? They told her lie for her and convinced everyone that she had graduated, and with honors. Even going so far as to throw her a graduation party for something that never happened. And I contend that it was in that moment, when cornered in those series of lies, that the parents of Casey Anthony made a critical mistake that they had likely been making the entirety of her young life. While no parent is perfect, speaking from experience, one thing is true for all parents. Covering up the lies of your children only serves to ensure that those small misdeeds today becomes the pain and suffering of everyone tomorrow.
Did you lose a phone?
Yes.
Was it your personal phone?
It was my personal phone, but I also use it for business.
Okay. What's the number for the phone that you lost?
407-619-9286. It's
Did
the
you
same
keep
number.
that same number?
Yes, it's
You
still
just
the
lost
same
the
number.
phone.
I just lost the phone.
And in that phone, you're saying was the SIM card, and the SIM card had the contact
Actually,
information?
the SIM card is in my Nokia phone, but I know there's numbers saved to the cell phone itself. So if we get the actual phone, I know I have one other number for Zenaida, and probably a number for Jeff besides work numbers, and
But they're not in your SIM card?
they're not saved on the SIM card, they're saved on the phone. I've been trying to figure out on that new phone how to save numbers from the phone to the SIM card and switch them back and forth. So that way I have everything all in one piece.
Okay, so the phone where you had the number saved was lost.
Yes, I filed an incident report.
But how did you end up keeping the SIM card?
I had taken it out. I know I left the phone on my desk at work after I'd switched the SIM card back to my old phone, because this was the phone that actually would keep charge.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to be able to have a working phone instead of having a phone that would only stay charged for about a half hour and then it would die and I can't make any more calls. It's, for me, not
So
practical.
after you switched the SIM card is when the phone went?
I left
Missing.
it. I know I left it on my desk, and I hadn't been at work for at least 3 or 4 days.
And you said you made the report to Universal? Or?
Yes, with security.
When
9
was that?
days ago.
9 days ago?
Yes.
Okay.
There was no report filed with security because she didn't work there anymore and hadn't for 2 entire years. And for me, it's the brazenness of her lies that leaves me shaking my head in stunned disbelief. Because while she's spewing lie after lie, she hasn't once brought up Kaylee. Not once. She hasn't asked about their efforts to find her, if they can wrap up these questions so that she can get back on the street to look for her baby. And this is precisely why the American public and the world looks at Casey Anthony with such disgust. Because in all of these interactions, all of the recordings, all of the conversations to her family, to law enforcement, and to anyone willing to listen, she shows no concern, worry, or sadness over the disappearance of her daughter, Kaylee, which only serves to reverberate like the incessant ramblings of a self-absorbed sociopath whose very existence leaves anyone paying attention with the confidence that all of her actions were premeditated and planned, that she wanted to distract anyone and everyone from finding what she was hiding in a swamp down the street from her house, praying to God that the evidence of her guilt would simply fade away.
So you met Zenaida through Jeffrey Hopkins.
I did.
And his son Zach Hopkins, I guess. Zenaida used to watch over Zach?
Yes.
And you say you've known Zenaida for about 4 years?
Almost 4 years,
So
yes.
you knew her before you had your child?
Well, I met her just before I was actually pregnant at the time. So.
And when did she start watching over your child?
It's been within the last 1.5 to 2 years that she started watching Kaylee. I had another friend watch Kaylee that I've known since middle school. When she went back to school, I was looking for a new nanny. Jeff offered to have Zenaida watch both kids. She agreed, and it kind of went from there.
Before Zenaida started watching over your child, who was the nanny?
Her name was Lauren Gibbs, Gibbs.
And when did Lauren stop watching your child?
Maybe April of 2006.
Okay. And right in April 2006, roughly, is when Zenaida started watching
Yes.
over? How would you normally drop off, or how would you normally do the exchange with your child and Zenaida? Would you drop the child off? Would she meet you somewhere?
I would usually drop her off.
Every single question Detective Mellick is asking is strategic. During this interview, law enforcement had already started to run down all of the information Casey had previously provided in her sworn statement. And during this interrogation, there was already an entire team of law enforcement officers who were on the phone calling the apartment complexes, running down the leads, speaking with the HR department of Universal Studios. And every single call would reveal more of the truth that they had already begun to suspect. That Casey Anthony was hiding something sinister, but it almost seems asinine that anyone would blatantly lie about every aspect of their story, to law enforcement no less, a group of people whose entire job is to verify and investigate. Unless, of course, the whole purpose of the lies was to delay the discovery of the forensics, which would ultimately reveal the truth. A truth she was desperate to keep hidden.
For a few months, we would go over to Jeff's house. He lived over in Avalon Park. That was almost a couple years ago.
And you would go to Jeff's house, why?
To drop off Kaylee. That's where Zenaida would go to watch both of the kids.
Okay.
It was in a nice centralized area. He had a decent sized house. It was good room for the two of them. Then I started bringing Kaylee over to Zenaida's apartment.
How long were you going to Zenaida's apartment? When did you start taking Kaylee?
I guess maybe the end of 2006, beginning of 2007.
So since the end of 2006, beginning of 2007, you started taking Kaylee to Zenaida's house on Sawgrass.
She had an apartment on, I guess it's considered Glenwood, but it's off of Bumby and Robinson, close to downtown. She lived there for quite a few months and moved over to Sawgrass just recently this year.
The house on Bumby, do you remember the address or remember where it's at?
I know it's off of Glenwood. I don't remember the apartment number offhand. No, I do not.
And how long would you say you dropped the child off there? From the beginning of, end of 06, beginning of 07 to?
Maybe about 6-7 months, so maybe the middle of 2007.
So she moved into Sawgrass about the middle of 07?
She's been at that apartment in Sawgrass for about the last 3 or 4 months. She lived with her mom for a little bit.
Where does her mom live?
She lived off of Michigan.
Do you know where the house is?
It's not a very well marked neighborhood. It crosses just over Conway. It's one of the big stretches of neighborhoods.
Had you dropped the child off there before?
Yes.
If you had to find the place, would you be able to find it?
Most likely, yes. I think I'd remember the house.
Okay, so she was living off of Glenwood, then moved into her mom's house somewhere off of Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
For the last several minutes, Casey has provided detailed location information, specifics of where, when, and how she would drop off Kaylee, and information about Zenaida, her babysitter. There isn't a single scintilla of truth in what she just said. Kaylee is missing, and she's fabricating lies that will soon eradicate her credibility to the entire world. But yeah, she was right. These were just everyday lies that people tell to the police. You've got to be kidding me.
And then moved
And
into
then over to
Sawgrass.
Sawgrass.
So Sawgrass 3 or 4 months ago, off of Glenwood until mid-07, then mom's house.
Her mom wasn't living there at the time. Her mom had gotten another place with her sister, but she was staying over at the house and moved in with the 2 girls that are referenced in the pages.
She was living with these 2 girls at Sawgrass?
Yes.
Okay. Go back to your statement. You dropped off Kaylee on June 9th, and walk me through. You dropped her off to go to work?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Get off of work and go from there.
I got off of work, left Universal, driving back to pick up Kaylee like a normal day, and I show up to the apartment, knock on the door, nobody answers. So I call Zenaida's cell phone, and it's out of service. It says that the phone is no longer in service. Excuse me. So I sit down on the steps and wait for a little bit to see if maybe it was just a fluke, if something happened. And time passed. I didn't hear from anyone. No one showed up to the house. So I went over to J. Blanchard Park and checked a couple other places where maybe possibly they would have gone. A couple stores, just regular places that I know Zenaida shops at, and she's taken Kaylee before. And after about 7 o'clock, when I still hadn't heard anything, I was getting pretty upset, pretty frantic, and I went to a neutral place. I didn't really want to come home. I wasn't sure what I'd say about not knowing where Kaylee was. Still hoping that I would get a call or, find out that Kaylee was coming back so that I could go get her. And I ended up going to my boyfriend Anthony's house, who lives in Sutton Place.
Did you talk to Anthony about what happened with Kaylee?
No, I did not.
Had Anthony ever seen Kaylee before?
Yes, he had.
Now imagine for a moment you've just discovered that your child is missing, and you suspect that your baby, the child that you've loved and raised from birth, has been fatally harmed by your own father. Now, eventually you're able to break away and meet up with your significant other. Now, it may seem like a stupid question, but indulge me. What would you do in that situation? Well, if you're Casey Anthony, you wouldn't tell a soul that your monstrous father harmed your child. You don't tell law enforcement, your friends, your family, or your boyfriend. And in fact, you make a completely ridiculous lies that only serve to impeach your credibility to anyone who could have possibly believed that you were the victim all along. But you know the saying, right? If it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, then it must be a battleship.
Have you talked to anyone about Kaylee, about your incident with Kaylee? Or the fact that she's missing?
A couple people, a couple mutual friends.
Who did you talk to about it?
I talked to Jeffrey Hopkins.
Mm-hmm.
I also attempted to contact Zenaida's mother and never received a call back from her.
Do you know Zenaida's mother's name?
Now, I know what I just said, but to be clear, she didn't do any of this. She didn't tell anyone about Kaylee being missing. Now, despite the fact that she could conduct a masterclass in sociopathic behavior, she's not dumb either. She's starting to realize how absolutely absurd it would be for a mother to have lost their baby and then not to have told a single person about it. Which, by the way, completely clashes with her eventual defense at trial, that she hid the truth from everyone. And during the trial, even to this day, she claims that her father orchestrated everything, and she was just told to keep her mouth shut. But Casey, if that was true, then why did you tell 911 and the police that you had told other people about Kaylee being missing? Do you see how all those things contradict themselves? I already can't wait to hear whatever she's going to concoct in this upcoming documentary series, but mark my words, it will be another attempt at trying to elicit sympathy for the one person Casey Anthony cares about most, herself.
Wow, man. I think it's Gloria.
Do you know a telephone number for Zenaita's mom?
I do not know.
Do you have any of these numbers programmed into your SIM card that you kept into your other phone?
No, I do not.
How long did you have this old phone?
I've had the Nokia for almost a full year.
Okay. So after a full year of dealing with Zenaida and having her babysit, and you don't
Switching
remember...
numbers back and forth. Zenaita's number has changed a couple different times. She switched services between having Sprint and having AT&T or Singular.
What about Jeffrey? You've known him for at least 4 years.
His number's changed a couple different times from when he moved from Orlando up to North Carolina and back down to Jacksonville. I know I do have a current number for him.
How would you get that number?
If we can find that other phone, or I might have it online, I may be able to access it off the internet.
Okay. Who else did you talk to about this besides Jeffrey? You said you tried to call Zenaita's mom. You talked to Jeffrey. Who else did you talk about?
I talked to Juliette Lewis. She's one of my coworkers at Universal.
She works... You still work at Universal?
Yes,
What do you do at Universal?
I'm an event coordinator.
Okay. What is Juliet? What position is she? Where does she work?
She's also an event coordinator. We work in the same department.
Law enforcement is about to take Casey to her workplace at Universal Studios to meet her friend Juliette Lewis, and then after, they'll consult with her manager, Al Pacino, who will eventually help direct them to her best friend, Kanye West. Okay, seriously. Later that day, law enforcement would verify the non-existence of her made-up friend Juliette Lewis and confirm that no one by that name ever worked for Universal Orlando. They would also learn that Casey was not an event coordinator. She was the person who took pictures of people getting off the rides. But more and more, it's becoming clear that I've been wrong from the beginning, and Casey Anthony really was just telling normal, everyday lies.
You have a number for Juliet?
Ooh, offhand, I can't think of one.
Is she in your SIM card?
No, she's not. Some of the more recent numbers, her number just changed because she just moved back up north. She, within the last 2 months, has finished moving up to New York. She's subleasing her apartment.
So Juliet doesn't work at Universal anymore?
No, she does not.
When did she leave Universal?
About 2 months ago.
Who else did you talk to about it?
It's been within that small group. I've tried to find out just information from people, going out to different places like Fusion Ultra Lounge and a couple bars that I know Zenaida had gone to downtown before to see if, just kind of random talk, if anybody heard about my nanny or talked to her lately.
Did you tell anyone specifically that Zenaida took your child?
No. The only 2 people that I specifically told were Jeff and Juliet.
And you don't have a number for Juliet?
Not offhand, no. I do not.
It's not on your phone? It might be online?
It's definitely online. I know it's on one of our old worksheets. Her old number, which could still be active. I'm not sure if it is, but I know she does have a new number, which I just programmed into that other phone.
When was the last time you talked to Juliet?
About 3 weeks ago, shortly after this happened.
So you talked to her after she left?
Mm-hmm.
What's the reason, I asked you this before and I'll ask you just for the record, what's the reason you didn't call the police before? Since right now we're here because your grandparents, or your parents, asked you about the child and they were concerned, didn't get an answer as to where the child was, they called the sheriff's office.
Mm-hmm.
Why didn't you call prior to today?
I think part of me was naive enough to think that I could handle this myself, which obviously I couldn't. And I was scared that something would happen to her if I did notify the authorities or got the media involved or my parents, which I know would have done the same thing. Just fear of the unknown, fear of the potential of Kaylee getting hurt, of not seeing my daughter again.
Detective Mellick would later say just how convincing Casey Anthony was during this stage of the investigation, just before they had fully developed their case against her. Even though all of her statements were coming back as deceptions, comments like the one she just made actually seemed genuine and somehow reasonable. Despite their better judgment, they still quietly allowed for the faint possibility that her story still could have merit. This is a hallmark of skilled sociopaths. Their ability to convince their audience that a lie, despite evidence to the contrary, is still somehow the truth. It's the highest form of gaslighting because even when you call them out on it, they'll deny their behavior and then do everything in their power to convince you of your mistake and reaffirm their veiled and phony authenticity.
I asked you this at the onset and asked you before we went on tape, and I'll ask you again just to make sure we're clear. Is there anything about this story that you're telling me that is untrue? Or is there anything that you want to change or divert from what you've already told me?
No, sir.
Did you cause any injury to your child, Kaylee?
No, sir.
Did you hurt Kaylee or leave her somewhere and you're worried that if we find that out that people are going to look at you a wrong way?
No, sir.
And you're telling me that Zenaida took your child without your permission and hasn't returned her?
The last person that I've seen with my daughter, yes.
Where did Zenaida, does she have another job besides watching children?
She has a seasonal ID for Universal. However, the only job that I know that she's had for the last few years, she's been a nanny.
So seasonal employee at Universal?
Mm-hmm.
When was the last time she worked at Universal, do you know?
I have no idea.
Casey's lies carried far-reaching devastation beyond that of her own family. Her make-believe story about Zanny the nanny would profoundly impact the life of the woman named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez. She didn't know Casey, had never met her or her daughter Kaylee, but Casey allowed this disgusting lie to turn into a wave of hate that fell squarely on a woman who had nothing to do with the death and disappearance of Kaylee Anthony. Zenaida would go on to file a defamation lawsuit, but due to a legal technicality, Casey would win that battle too. It would seem that Casey Anthony has truly mastered the craft of getting away with absolutely everything.
Does Kaylee take any medications? Does she suffer from any conditions, any mental conditions that we need to know of?
Not at all.
It was brought up before about taking some money from some people, and I want to make sure I get it on tape. Do you have any problems with drugs or narcotics, either prescription narcotics or drugs, cocaine, ecstasy, meth, anything like that?
Nothing like that.
Have you ever been committed for thoughts of suicide? Have you ever been on the lakeside, anything like that?
No.
Is there any underlying cause to why Zenaida would have taken your child?
No. Nothing that...
Did she ever make any statements to you about...
Only how much she loves Kaylee and how great of a kid she is.
And have you talked, and when you talked to Jeffrey afterwards, I'm assuming that Jeffrey's child is still with him?
His child is still with him.
Okay. You said Zenaida had family up in New England, up in New York or something?
Yes, she has family down south. Her mother and her sister. Her brother's in New York. She's originally from New York.
And where's down south?
Miami area.
Where's she originally from?
New York.
She born and raised in New York? She have family outside of the country, or?
I don't know. As far as I know, she pretty much grew up there, moved down here, went to the University of Florida.
Is she Puerto Rican? Is she Dominican? Is she white?
She's mixed. She's black and Puerto Rican.
And you don't know what her birthday is, or you don't know what her birthday is?
It's in September. That's all I can remember at the moment.
if when we finish this, would you be willing to drive with me to show me where her mom lives and the apartment that you used to drop her off at?
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything I haven't asked you about Kaylee or Zenaida, or just this incident in particular that you feel is important that you wanted to tell me about before I turn this off?
I mean, Kaylee has very distinctive features, even if her hair was cut or changed. She has dark hazel eyes, they're brown and green. She has a birthmark on her left shoulder.
What kind of birthmark?
It's just like a small line. It almost looks like a small little beauty mark.
Anything else?
I just want my daughter back.
Okay. Would you raise your right hand for me?
Yes.
Do you swear and affirm everything you just told me is the truth?
Yes.
At the conclusion of this initial interview, police would take Casey to the various locations and addresses that she had provided in her statement, infamously strolling onto the Universal Studios lot, pretending that she still knew people and that she actually worked there, only to lead investigators down a hall and finally turn around to admit her ridiculous ruse, that she didn't actually work at Universal Studios and hadn't for years. The officers who had accompanied her wisely escorted Casey into a conference room, turned on their videotape recorders, and prepared to confront and expose the crumbling avalanche of Casey's lies.
Date right now is July 16th, 2008. It's about 13:20 hours. We're at Universal Studios. I'm here with Sergeant Allen. I'm here with Detective Happy Wells. Also here with Casey Anthony. And Casey, we talked earlier this morning, and we're working a case looking for your daughter Kaylee. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. We came here to Universal Studios. We're sitting in a little conference room. Obviously the door isn't locked. We just closed it so we could have a little bit of privacy and talk to you. Mm-hmm. And a couple more questions came up that we need to ask you about. Remember how I opened this whole thing in the morning?
Yeah.
By saying that, we need to get the complete truth and the snowball effect and how it goes? Okay. We're about halfway down that hill, 3/4 down that hill, and it's a pretty big snowball, which means that there's a lot of stuff going on right now. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you, just for certainty, that everything you've told me so far has been a lie. I can tell you with a certainty, and let me explain why. Since I left you this morning, mm-hmm. I've gone to every address that you've told me. I've looked up every name. I've talked to every person that you wanted me to talk to or tried to. Mm-hmm. I've reached out. I've talked to your ex-boyfriend. I've talked to Amy. I've talked to Tony. I came over here. I've already talked to all the employees. Mm-hmm. I found out all these names that you're giving me are people that either never worked here or have been fired here for a long time ago. Okay, so where we are right now is in a position that doesn't look very good for you. Mm-hmm. And this is going to be your escape hatch, so to speak. Okay, this is going to be the point where you stop all the lies and you stop all the fibs and you tell us exactly what's going on. Mm-hmm. I'm just being straight with you. Because obviously I know and you know that everything you told me is a lie, correct?
Not everything that I told you.
In my experience, offenders in this position will typically do one of two things once they're caught by law enforcement in an elaborate lie of this magnitude. They will either immediately lawyer up or begin to tell some version of the truth. But let's put this situation into perspective. Casey has wasted law enforcement's entire day, having run them around the state of Florida looking for a nanny that doesn't exist, visiting places of employment that she doesn't have, conjuring people who aren't real, and still these officers of the law demonstrate a spectacular amount of restraint despite the lies she's fabricated all day long. And despite her disgusting displays of deception, she's calm, collected, and undeterred, and has the cojones to tell the officer that not everything she's said is a lie. Who is Casey Anthony? I'll take infamous sociopaths for 200.
Okay, pretty much everything that you've told me, including where Kaylee is right now.
That I don't know where she is.
Sure you do. And here's
absolutely do not know where she is.
Let me explain something. Together, a combined experience in this room, we all have about 30 years of doing this. Mm-hmm. Okay, both myself and Sergeant John Allen worked for the homicide division for several years. We've dealt with several people. We've conducted thousands of interviews between the three of us. Happy's got 20 years, so just between the three of us, we've got several years. And I can tell you for a certainty that right now, looking at you, I know that everything that you've told me is a lie, including the fact that your child was last seen about a month ago, and that you don't know where she is. See, I I'm very confident, just by having talked to you this short period of time, that you know where she is.
I don't.
You do. And here's the thing, we need to get past that, because we can sit here and go back and forth all day long about I don't, I do, I don't, I do. It's pretty obvious that with everything that you've told us, nothing has been truth. You know where she is. Now, my question to you is this. We need to find Kaylee. I understand that right now, Kaylee may not be in very good shape. You understand what I'm saying? She may not be the way we or the way your family last remembers her. We need to find out from you where Kaylee is. This right now is this is going so far downhill, and this has become such a mess that we need to end it. It's very simple. We just need to end it.
I agree with you. I have no clue where she is.
Sure you do.
If I knew in any sense where she was, this wouldn't have happened at all.
You
it
know,
wouldn't have happened
listen,
whatsoever.
This stuff about Zanny, the caretaker or the nanny taking care of him,
It's the truth.
it's not the truth, because it went to the apartment complex. There's no person that ever lived there by that name. The apartment's been vacant since March. That same apartment. Now, the apartment that you pointed out to me, the 2-story apartment, that's an old folks' home. It's right across the street from your ex-boyfriend's house, who you never mentioned. And you said you wrote the address down because it was across the street. That's a lie, because I've already talked to him, and we've already been by the house, and we've already looked at everything we need to look at over there. Mm-hmm. Everything you told us is a lie.
This is likely the first moment in Casey's entire life that anyone has ever forced her to see her behavior for what it is. Normally in these situations, she would likely double, triple, and quadruple down, endlessly gaslighting anyone and everyone until they relented and just gave up. And rest assured, this moment still bothers her to this day, which is why she's still talking about it, because no one had ever forced her to see herself for what she really is. A pathological liar, someone who does not care what you, her parents, or anyone thinks of her, because in her mind, she's the victim. And she can turn any situation into a way that she can glean empathy, because no matter how much evidence is stacked against her, she'll find a way to obscure the truth.
Well, now, there's a couple of ways that this goes. Right now, we can, I've never met you before, so I can look at you in one of a couple of ways. I can look at you as a person who's scared, who's concerned, and who's kind of afraid of what's going to happen because of something bad that happened before. Or we can look at you as cold, callous, and a monster who doesn't care, who's just trying to get away with something something bad that happened and trying to cover it up. It's going to be one of those two options. Now, from what I've already talked to you, okay, you seem like a very bright young lady. You don't seem like someone who has no education. All right. Now, what we have to do is we have to determine which way is this going to go. Are you a person who's scared about the consequences of what happened? Or are you scared about something that happened? Or are you really this cold, callous person who doesn't care about what happened? It's one of these two options.
I'm scared that I don't know where my daughter is.
See,
I would not have put my entire family.
Hold on. I want to ask you something.
Yes, sir.
Like you said, you seem like a pretty bright person. Okay, you're here willingly, right? You're here because you're here to try to help, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Your whole reason for talking to us is to try to help, right? Mm-hmm. Nobody's forced you to talk to us, right?
No.
You want us to. You're here because you called. You want us to help find your daughter, right? Mm-hmm. Now let me ask you something. I want you to put yourself in somebody else. Put yourself in my shoes for a minute, okay? Since you've talked to him this morning in an attempt to try to help find your daughter, you've given him bad addresses, okay? You drove me all the way out here. We walked from the gate back here on the way to your office, right? Okay? To an office that you don't have. We got all the way into the building, into the hallway out here before you finally says, well, I really don't have an office here. But up till then, we were walking to your office, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so does any of this make sense to you?
I understand how all of that sounds.
No. Here's the problem with that, though. Okay?
You understand how that sounds? You manufactured a spectacular lie, and once cornered in it, you don't offer an apology for any of it and claim to understand how it sounds? If Casey Anthony ever wonders why the public remains reviled by her story, it's because of moments like this. Because at every possible opportunity that she could have done the right thing, she chooses to do the polar opposite. and now intends to further cloud the memory of Kaylee with her upcoming documentary. If this wasn't real and I hadn't seen this case unfold myself, I swear I wouldn't have believed it. Now, in closing today, I want to address something that has already come up prior to my posting this episode. I have already received critiques concerning my stance on Casey Anthony, and to that, my response is very simple. I am not a journalist, but I am a father who understands the importance of protecting our children, all of our children, and Kaylee Anthony deserved better. And using this platform, I will continue to advocate for the memory of Kaylee Anthony and the rights of all victims in these cases. But this is just the beginning of our journey through the Casey Anthony story. And in episode 2, I will help break down the misconceptions of the medical examiner's testimony during trial and how profoundly that misstep by the prosecution affected the outcome of this case. I want to thank you for joining me here today and taking the time to revisit this profoundly relevant case with me. I would greatly appreciate your comments and suggestions for future content as well. And please, it would help immensely if you would consider hitting the like button, and if you enjoyed today's content, please consider subscribing. I release new content weekly, and next week I will premiere the new series for the Sarah Boone case. I would also like to thank our Patreon and YouTube supporters who make this content possible. Thank you so much to each of you for your support. I could not have imagined that we would already be sitting at nearly 6,000 subscribers after just 3.5 weeks. The BCM community is truly incredible, but stay tuned because I have new and exciting content coming very soon. This has been Behind Criminal Minds. We'll see you next time.